Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video. In this video, I'll be reviewing the first season of The Challenge All-Stars, this spin-off series to The Challenge involving old school players. And in general, from what I've seen, there's been a lot of praise for this season. And while I do agree with a lot of that praise from a conceptual standpoint, I do feel like this season's execution was a bit all over the place, and I do feel like that harms my opinion of the season as a whole. Again, the concept is great, and I do feel like if they learn from their mistakes from this season, they can make a much better product moving forward. But I do feel like this season's rush pace, its short episode length, its mediocre format, and for the most part lack of actual gameplay did lower my opinion on this season. Though again, seeing these people back on TV decades after their first appearance is still incredible to see, and this did seem like a good mix of the new and old school style of The Challenge, though again, it does really need longer episodes and just a better format to fully live up to its potential. With that said, let's get more in depth on my thoughts about the season by running through it episode by episode, starting off with the premiere, where we do get a pretty fun intro showing footage from previous seasons. And again, despite me being a very recent fan of The Challenge and not having watched some of the seasons that these people have been on, it was cool to see this like really nostalgic feel for seeing these people back. People like a Katie, a Mark Long, and Alton, Cyrus, Fascella. I mean, it was cool to see these people back here. We also get a fun intro to Fascella with her falling down the steps, and she's someone that, despite me seeing her on the Gauntlet 2, I barely really remembered her outside of her quitting in the Elimination. So the fact that she comes back here and is a pretty fun character was a pretty pleasant surprise to me. But then when you learn the format, and again, I did not love this format. I mean, the fact that it is an individual game that only has one winner isn't ideal to me. Now, we'll talk about it when we get to the final, that the final format wasn't as bad as I was expecting, but I do still think it is bizarre to have this older school season of the show that has one winner. I mean, overall, I'm okay with it being an individual game, but I just wish there was like one winner of each sex, especially when we have like so many people in the final just in general. Feels weird to just have one winner of the season. And while I do like the free agents-esque format of constantly changing competition styles from teams to individuals, I really don't like how the team leaders were decided on this season and how they do go straight into elimination. I mean, I would prefer the format where the worst performers in the daily always went in, not necessarily the leader of the worst performing team. I also didn't love that we just started off eliminating people one person at a time. For me, I feel like we should have had double eliminations the entire way. Like, while that we get to a point where they start having double eliminations, the fact that we have these first 4 rounds where only one person goes home and we get to a final with 12 people is just ridiculous. When this, again, the season started off with 22. So over half the people made the final. I also didn't love the inclusion of the lifesaver. I mean, yes, it's only there for the first few episodes, and it is a cool callback to previous seasons, but to me, it never felt like a good incentive for the opposite sex to even try in a daily. I mean, it never felt like there were any real stakes for the opposite sex in this competition. Like, I feel like they should have had prizes like they did in previous seasons of the challenge that would have made it feel like these people are actually playing for something useful. But as for the actual episode itself, we do get a number of cool callback moments. Really, all this really felt like was fan service. I mean, it really doesn't end up leading to anything within this season. We do get the daily, which both teams end up sucking here, and I really didn't like how, in this premiere in particular, they really played up like, oh, these people are old, these people aren't good in challenges anymore, like this sort of thing. It's like, they call it the Challenge Senior Edition. Like, again, I get it. I get the point. It felt very heavy-handed. But Leterian's team ends up losing, putting him into elimination, and the strategy here kind of gets boring, where Leterian talks about how he wants to go after Ace, and everyone just kind of complies, and really that goes for the entire season. Like, again, the level of gameplay on the season was pretty low, where it felt like they were just voting in people that were either volunteering or people that the person who was already going to elimination wanted to go up against. Like, there was no real major moments of gameplay, though there are some interesting votes here and there. Again, this wasn't one of those Ace goes in, but where we're lacking in gameplay, I did feel like we get a pretty fun nomination ceremony where Ace is just pissed at everyone. And while he does play this pretty poorly, I don't think there was that much he could really do here anyway. Now, for the elimination, we do get a party segment, again, kind of like the old school challenge seasons, which was kind of weird to see these people in their 40s like partying like they're 20, but again, it did feel like a really nostalgic moment there. We didn't get to Elimination, where again, we get another cool callback where Fascella does not use the lifesaver because she was upset about how Ace talked about her back in the Gauntlet 2, which again, like a very minuscule callback there, but still a pretty cool thing to see. But again, Elimination ends up being pole wrestle, which felt really brutal here, where like Leterian ends up picking up Ace at points and really just demolishes him. And I really like Ace. I do feel bad for him within the challenge, where outside of the Infernal 3, where he does get to a final, he has a pretty early boot on almost any other season that he's on. And again, I feel like he comes off as pretty likable here. I think Ace is just naturally one of the most likable people on the challenge. I don't feel like he's done anything that's really made him dislikable over the course of the series. Again, I do think he plays pretty poorly here, where once the target is on his back, he probably handles it the worst possible way. But again, like, I don't think it really would change much. I think he was going to Elimination anyway. But I was happy to see him here, and that's kind of a change from where I was before season, where before season Ace was one of those people that was like, do we really need to see Ace again? But I thought he was fun here. I thought he was a likable presence and made a pretty big impact as the first boot of the season. We then get to episode 2, where from the beginning it seemed to revolve around Trishelle and Kendall. So, I mean, I wonder who's going to Elimination. Which, I'll talk about that now. I mean, that's really one of my biggest issues with the editing of this season, is that it is so blatant who's going to Elimination pretty much every episode because of how little time they have to work with. Essentially, whatever they're showing almost always ends up being very important to that episode. And because that, you can very clearly tell who's going to Elimination, who's probably winning the daily, and also who's probably losing the Elimination as well. And like, so because that, the results of each of these episodes kind of came off as pretty stale to me. But again, Trishelle in particular gets a lot of content here, with her apologizing to Anissa over some racist comments she made during Rivals 2. And we also get background on her relationship with Katie, which I wonder if that'll be important in this episode. We do get the trivia daily, which I did like that it was challenge history trivia, and this leads to flashbacks to those events that they're talking about. And I really liked how, again, this season really embraced the history of the show. Though I did feel like the way this challenge functioned was kind of dumb, where if you get it wrong, they have to move to the next board, and it seemed very weight dependent, though it didn't really even work out that way, where like, for the women, Anissa ends up winning, I mean, pretty much because she just dominates the questions. The men's round was pretty pointless to me. Again, like, who cares about who gets the lifesaver? But we do get some notable moments here, from like Katie injuring her face once again, just like she did back in Cutthroat. But this does also cause Kendall to get scared about falling and jumping out of bounds, DQing her, and makes her the easy scapegoat when it comes to the vote later in the episode. But then we get the Trishelle Katie subplot, which I don't fully get what they were fighting about here, but it did really feel like a fight that you would see on an older season of the show. These two drunk people at 4 a.m. arguing over, I think, like Trishelle thinking that Katie hasn't been backing her up, and they try to play this up as, is Katie gonna get Nehemiah to use the lifesaver? But again, that really ends up going nowhere, and we do get a Trishelle versus Kendall elimination, where it was pretty clear that Kendall was going to win, given her edit about wanting to prove herself, and obviously she does. So we do lose Trishelle, who is a bit of a mess whenever she's on TV. I did find her entertaining on Battle of the Seasons 2. I mean, she was a complete train wreck on Rivals 2, probably not in a good way, but I did feel like she was good TV here. I mean, she had this edit that was a bit all over the place. I mean, she had that good moment with Anissa, but then she had her feud with Katie, so we kind of saw her grow from her time from Rivals 2, only for her to be shown as pretty immature immediately afterwards. It was a weird run from her, but still an entertaining one. And now for episode 3, which felt like the first episode that had some interesting strategy going on. I mean, a lot of the episode focuses around Nehemiah and him wanting to play more strategically this time and build an alliance with Jemmy. And Jemmy also gets a lot of credit with adding in Beth and Mark Long to their alliance, with them being her challenge parents. We do also get to see Tech and Ruthie's relationship, with Tech fishing naked, which was weird but kind of a fun character moment. We also see Ruthie's feud with Anissa, and the two do later get into a pretty fun argument, but again, like, this ends up amounting to nothing. And that's really my big issue with this season as a whole, is that while there are a lot of these like moments that feel like old school challenge seasons, they really amount to nothing most of the time and really just feel like fan service within the season. And I think a lot of that comes down to presentation. Like, I feel like if they were given more time to work with, it could have edited these scenes to make them feel more impactful over the course of the season, but instead, like, we're just being shown random clips of like cool callbacks, but like they don't really mean anything. But then we get to the daily where they had to use their bodies to melt a block of ice, and this led to a lot of awkward moments, and we do see a lot of like spitting water onto the ice, and all that just felt disgusting. And I didn't find this fun to watch. I was just like deeply disturbed by what I was seeing here. We do also get like a bizarre character moment of Arisa stopping in the middle of the challenge to ask the sun for help, and that was bizarre. And even stranger thing about the challenge is that we never even see them end up melting the ice. Like, TJ ends up giving up and just gives them a hammer. So like for me, all this was pretty pointless. Nehemiah's team ends up shockingly losing here. And I really felt it dumb that like Tech just out of nowhere just starts calling him out and starts smack talking him, and it's like, you're kind of making it obvious that you're going to get thrown in. Based on what we're shown, this seems really dumb. But then we get to the party where Kendall has the lifesaver, and she ends up playing way too hard here with her talking about throwing Big Easy in, and she does this so loudly that everyone can hear her at the party. And this like train wrecky Kendall edit was pretty fun to see. But again, this is something I hate about the show. Like, why not just tell the players the rules? I mean, she doesn't end up using it because she doesn't know how the replacement's going to be decided. And again, this is something that I just hate about the challenge in general. Obviously, they're going to play more cautiously if they don't know what the rules are. But we do get to elimination. It's Nehemiah versus Tech, where we do get this really bizarre opening to the challenge where they have to eat the world's hottest peppers for seemingly no reason, as the rest of the challenge involves breaking tiles. But whatever, Nehemiah barely wins here, but again, like by the edit, I was pretty sure he was going to. But we do end up losing Tech here, who I never heard of coming into the season, but I did find him to be a really great character. He did have some fun confessionals, and I really liked the energy he brought to the show. He did also seem to be pretty well liked within the house, but again, the fact that he calls out Nehemiah just seems like a really bad move, painting a massive target on himself. So again, not a great player, but definitely an entertaining one that I wasn't expecting coming into the season. Now for episode 4, where we start off with content about Cyrus and Beth's relationship, followed by getting some background on Arisa. So again, I wonder who's going into elimination here. We do get the daily, which was a cool concept, but I don't think it made for the greatest TV, where both rounds ended up being blowouts here. Mark also got content here about wanting to win the lifesaver, so again, I wonder who's going to win the lifesaver. But we also do see Katie and Janae also get content along the way, with Janae getting this inspirational moment of how being a mom has changed her and made her stronger, only for her to drop in the water immediately afterwards, which was kind of funny. But we do also see Katie quit due to fearing injury here from falling in the water, as again, she has been injured from the water multiple times now. And this does lead to her volunteering to go in against Beth. But then the rest of the episode does revolve around Mark and the lifesaver, where Mark just wants to see what happens when it's used. So he does leverage this pretty well, having one-on-ones with most of the cast, garnering trust with people, and again, the typical thing that you would expect Mark Long to do, even though I do feel like he does it a bit too blatantly. But we do learn that Mark plans on replacing Katie with Kendall. But when he uses the lifesaver here, we find out that Mark doesn't decide who goes in. Instead, we get an immediate vote without any deliberation. And this could have been fun, but Darrell just asks Beth, hey, who do you want to go in? She says Arisa, and then we just get a pretty easy Arisa vote to a degree. And Kendall does play this terribly by voting Anissa back, instead of, again, going for Arisa, who's the bigger target here. And again, Arisa plays this terribly too by voting for Kellyanne, which again, all this is just dumb. And when you see that you are being targeted and there's another person that is getting close to the number of votes that you're getting, why are you just throwing away your votes for no reason? It's so dumb. And then Arisa ends up getting voted in. She's pissed. She asks if she can box Beth, which was just funny. And you do get this complete meltdown from Arisa, calling out the other players and saying she doesn't want to be under the same roof as them, and just leaves and storms off. And this is when TJ says the "see you never" that we see all the time in the trailers. And it was such a ridiculous end to the episode, but it probably is one of the most notable moments for me from the season. But let's talk about Arisa, who just seemed to be this like wacky, zany character in the last couple episodes here, with her like, again, praying to the sun, her getting content about being an outsider, and this is further perpetuated by her exit here, where it's just hilarious when she storms off. She didn't really get that much content outside of that, though, throughout the season, and you could tell she wasn't really enjoying her time there. I mean, obviously, that supposedly there were a lot of issues with her needing a specific type of food and like people eating her food, leaving her with very few things to eat. And it sucks that she had to deal with that, but really though, it wasn't that big of a surprise to see her leave this early. Now for episode 5, which did get a lot of focus around Cyrus and Alton, which again made it pretty clear who was going into elimination. But then we get to the daily where we learn that the lifesaver twist is done, which again was mostly a pointless twist outside the last episode. Where even then, it's like, I think they just got lucky that Mark Long was ballsy enough to try to use it to begin with. But for the daily itself, it was a mini final that did get some interesting results, with Alton of all people just gassing out. That was pretty shocking for me to see. And because of that, we do see Cyrus taking charge of his team despite being injured. And this was a great moment for Cyrus. Though at the puzzle checkpoint, him and Beth really just botch it and they end up coming in last. And at this point, we were under the assumption that only one person was going to elimination. So we thought Cyrus was going to elimination. Though obviously it ends up being both of them. Well, we do see Cyrus being really pissed off at Alton for slowing the team down earlier and him wanting to go against him in the elimination, which felt really dumb to me. I mean, I feel like yes, Alton had a weak performance there, but he's still one of the most intimidating guys in the game here. So for Cyrus to actively want to go against him instead of someone like a Big Easy felt like an unnecessary risk, which obviously doesn't end up paying off. Now, I was also surprised to see Leterian win the daily here, as he's someone that I had no real expectations for coming into the season, but he seemed to be one of the better competitors on the season. We did also get some content about Alton and Fascella's showmance, which was fine. I mean, again, doesn't really amount to much over the course of the season, outside of Fascella possibly trying to save him at points, but again, it really felt like a nothing plot point here. We then get to the elimination where we get a twist that every elimination from this point forward will be a double elimination. And it's like, why wasn't that just every round of the game? But I will say that I don't like that it was just sprung on the players here, as again, Beth doesn't learn that she's going into elimination until the elimination. It's like, why not just tell them before the challenge? Obviously they want them to be shocked and everything. But again, just felt like an unfair twist for them to throw at the last second, especially because Alton gets to literally pick any woman other than Kendall, as she was immune. And again, this felt super unfair for him to be able to get this massive advantage in picking literally anybody here. Again, this is the way that the format moves forward, and it's fine in the future episode, but I feel like here where they weren't given this information beforehand, it pretty much felt like Beth and Cyrus were being set up to be taken out pretty easily here. Now, I was kind of surprised to see Alton pick Anissa, which I mean isn't a terrible pick at the end of the day, considering Anissa is very good at eliminations, but it is funny how seeing her just come off of double agents where no one wanted to be partnered with her, to see her here be the top pick was kind of funny. But the elimination itself was a blowout, largely because Cyrus had a bad ankle and Alton and Anissa end up winning the elimination here, meaning we lost Beth and Cyrus. So let's talk about them. I mean, I did like what Cyrus brought to the table here. I mean, he's someone that, despite watching a good chunk of seasons with him, I never really got a good sense of his personality. I mean, he always felt like one of the weaker competitors on the season, and that aspect didn't really change here. But I feel like I liked him a lot more as a character now. I mean, it did feel like he seemed hungry in his confessionals for a win, and I did like how he was talking about coming back immediately after being eliminated here. I mean, he was someone that I was pleasantly surprised with on the season, despite me not having many opinions on him coming into this season. And then we have Beth, who I've always loved Beth as a character. I loved her on the older seasons. I mean, she's such a great villain back in the Inferno 2 and the Duel. And here she just seemed fine. I mean, she's obviously older, and I think she is nicer. She just doesn't seem to play that villainous role that she played really well back in the day. I mean, she seems like a more sociable, likable figure in the house here. And that didn't make for the greatest TV, but it was still cool to see her back on TV. Now for episode 6, where we do get this really weird daily, where despite there being this double elimination twist, we still get teams of 4 for some reason, where they pick team captains. Within that, again, I just don't know why they even bothered with team captains at this point. Just do the challenge in pairs. We don't need teams of 4. Why are we getting people volunteering as captain? Again, it's just such a dumb concept to me. And also, as much as I like Katie, I really didn't like that throughout this season, she just volunteers herself to be in danger at almost every opportunity. Where, again, she volunteers to be captain here and doesn't even try in the daily, largely because of her fear of falling in the water, which, again, who knew that this would be such a prominent storyline on this season? But also, even after she doesn't lose here, she does still volunteer to get voted in at the vote, which again, all comes off as pretty disappointing to me. But we do see Mark and Kendall losing the daily here. And considering Mark has made it pretty clear that he's been targeting Kendall through the game, it did lead to a pretty interesting dynamic of them having to work together coming into elimination. Though, again, the editing was so heavy-handed and really playing up their dynamic that I felt like it was pretty clear they were going to win whatever elimination they were in. And again, I found it interesting how they decide the other pair here, where, again, they vote for a woman to go into elimination. That ends up being Katie, and she gets to pick anyone to be paired up with. Again, I do think this adds an interesting dynamic to the game of you having to avoid being picked as the best partner for the person going into elimination. Though at the same time, again, like, it kind of sucks to see, like, the best competitor being dragged into elimination and potentially losing elimination due to having a weak partner. But it was something that I don't feel like we've seen before, and I feel like that at least made it interesting for at least this one go around. Though here, in Challenge All-Star tradition, we do have Leterian volunteering to go in, which kind of lessened the appeal of the strategy here, but we do get Mark and Kendall going up against Katie and Leterian in a tug-of-war elimination, where I was surprised to see Katie and Leterian actually win the first round. But obviously, Mark and Kendall still end up winning it, especially after Leterian seems to waste so much energy within that first round, and then you have Katie being Katie, so it's like, obviously we do lose them here. And let's talk about them, starting off with Katie, who, again, I love Katie as a character on her initial run on the show. Despite her never being that good of a competitor, and while she does bring some drama to the season with her relationship with Trishelle, I mean, outside of that, I really was underwhelmed with her run here, where to me it seemed like she just didn't care and put herself in danger over and over and over again. I mean, she just didn't seem hungry for the win here. And while it was cool to see her back, she's clearly just a changed person from what she was when she was younger, to where she just seems like a more normal person now. And because that didn't end up adding that much to the season, despite her being the person I was probably the most excited to see back out of the entire cast. And then we have Leterian, who is another one of these figures that I knew nothing about coming into the season, but I did find him a pretty likable figure here. I mean, he seemed to be one of the stronger guys here physically. His elimination of Ace is really great, and he did have a great premiere as a whole. But it kind of becomes an afterthought after that until this episode, where, again, he just comes off as a really nice guy. Probably not the best strategic mind out there, but he seemed like the perfect style of character that you would want to see on the Challenge All-Stars. And I would be pretty happy to see him return for a future season. Now for episode 7, where we did get a bit of a shakeup in the editing of this season, where right off the bat we get a lot of Derek and Anissa content. Again, making you think that, okay, that must mean they're either winning the daily or going into elimination. But no, none of that happens. We do get so much Derek here, though, that talks about how he wants to prove himself and win a daily, only for him to come in second to Mark. And there is some fun from his overconfidence during the challenge, especially considering he was in the lead the entire time until the last second, where Mark is like the last one to run and beats him. And we do also get a lot of Anissa content here through her relationship with Fascella that does deteriorate over the course of this episode, with Fascella and Big Easy going into elimination, and Fascella wanting to go against someone who hasn't been in elimination before, which essentially screamed out to me as like her trying to save Alton. But then again, Fascella gets really upset at Anissa when Anissa ends up being the swing vote between Nehemiah and Yes, and she ends up going against Fascella's wishes and voting for Nehemiah. But again, I don't get why Fascella really cares here. Like, why does it matter? Like, I mean, Nehemiah is probably an easier person to beat than Yes or Darrell, the two people that Fascella wanted to go up against. So I don't get why she acts as if Anissa really betrayed her so much here. And again, we get this argument between the two that just felt dumb to me, but the vote this round was pretty fun, where it did seem like Yes was going in until he like gives this plea about his relationships in the game, and it did feel like he did do a good job at building one-on-one bonds through the season that gets him through this round. And also I feel like Yes in general here was getting a bit of a prop in the edit right before the final, kind of obviously setting up his win. But again, it did feel like the Anissa content was going to lead to her going into elimination, and we do get her sob story about being underestimated that we get every recent season of the challenge. Again, all amounts to nothing, because Nehemiah ends up actually picking Kendall, and that did surprise me. I really thought Anissa was going in, but to be honest, I also really didn't think it was going to matter, as again, you would think Nehemiah and Kendall would blow Easy and Fascella out of the water here in any elimination. But Easy just kind of dominates the challenge here and beats Nehemiah again, which is just kind of hilarious to me, considering how Nehemiah just seems to have a history of losing to Big Easy. But this was the final elimination before the final, which again, I don't love that that's the case. I do wish we would have narrowed down the field a bit more, probably had 6 to 8 people in the final instead of 12, which again seems ridiculous to me that over half the people are in the final. But whatever, let's talk about the boots here, starting off with Nehemiah, who I was happy to see return. I mean, he always feels like one of these people that got really unlucky throughout challenge history. And considering we last saw him on Rivals, where he had no real chance of winning that season due to him being partnered with Evan, who didn't even want to be there, I was pretty happy to see him get another chance here. And I do think he does a pretty good job as a whole. I mean, he won Elimination. He had a group of people earlier on in the game that had the numbers. I mean, he was good on this season and is someone that I would like to see back for another one. And then we have Kendall, who I had never heard of coming into the season, and she was a surprisingly great competitor here. I mean, neck to neck with Kellyanne as like the best female competitor throughout the season. She played a pretty big impact on this season. I did feel like her underdog-esque run was pretty fun to see. I mean, she does seem like a pretty terrible political player where she doesn't have many allies and really felt expendable most of the way through, while also being a big threat to most of the people in the house. I mean, again, even Kellyanne, her closest ally, wanted her out as a big threat at points. Though I will say, like, I can't believe that storyline did not lead to anything. I really thought if Kendall was going home, it would have been in elimination with Kellyanne, or if they would have been in the final together and they would have been first or second place out of the women. Like, I really thought something was going to come out of that. But really, at the end of the day, Kendall definitely comes out as one of the bigger standouts of this season to me. And again, another one that I would be very happy to see back moving forward. But now for episode 8, where we start off the final, and we obviously get a lot of filler before the final, as you would expect, with the players talking about what it means to them to be in the final. But then we finally get to the final, which I was pleasantly surprised at the format. I mean, I was surprised I didn't hate the format here, as I was coming into it really not liking, again, the idea of one winner. And usually the finals typically favor men in these solo finals, but it turns out that the entire final is essentially going to be constructed as having these checkpoints being done in different pairs, where at every checkpoint you switch partners, and that's kind of like the free agents-esque format of the final, and I always like that format. But I do think it also benefits here from being dictated by points instead of overall time. I think it allows for a lot more dynamic of results in the final itself. Like, I think it really worked. And while there is a lot of luck involved of what partner you get during what checkpoint, I do think the point system kind of minimizes the downsides of that as well. And also, I think it really gives the women a chance here. Again, I think if this had been a strict physical final, like, I do think people like Darrell, Derek, and Mark Long would probably blow the rest out. But because of how the final was formatted here, I did feel like more people had opportunities to win it. And also because of that, I just enjoyed watching this final, which is a surprise considering, again, the final for me has typically been pretty boring on most seasons of the challenge. But again, I felt like this was a pretty good one. But we do also learn that the team that comes in last at the first checkpoint will be instantly eliminated. And it does involve a puzzle that I was surprised to see Easy have a lot of trouble here with, and because of that, him and Kellyanne end up being the last one to get to the canoeing section. Though during the canoeing section, we see Fascella and Derek really struggle to the point where they're like rowing backwards, and they do end up coming in last, getting eliminated. And let's just talk about him now, starting off with Derek, who was there. I mean, he gets a decent amount of airtime, but I just did not feel like he had that much to do. I mean, like, I was surprised to see him lose here, as again, it felt like he did get some setup through the edit of him potentially proving himself at some point, but like that never amounted to anything. He never really got the opportunity to do so. I mean, I like Derek, and I would like to see him on season 2 of the All-Stars moving forward, but I felt like with this season here, he was really just there to give these really generic confessionals. And then we have Fascella, who was one of the bigger characters on this season. She had a massive edit on this season, at least comparatively, and again, that was a massive surprise to me coming into the season, where, again, I've only seen her on the Gauntlet 2. But she really came off as fun here. I mean, she had major storylines with Alton and Anissa. She had this underdog elimination win with Easy. She's one of the most notable players from this season. I feel like she was one of the most consistent presences throughout. So when I look back at the Challenge All-Stars years down the road, I do feel like Fascella is one of the people that will stick out to my mind. Continuing on with the final, I did like how we got a schoolyard pick for partners each round, which gave the players more agency there. And again, I did like overall how this final was formatted. It does become clear, though, after a while, that it is pretty much between Darrell, Janae, Jemmy, and Kellyanne. And while hadn't gotten that much content throughout the season and had pretty minimal setup to a win here, I did feel like this episode felt like them trying to give some last minute good content, with people talking about how big of a threat he is and how he's performing well every checkpoint. And By the end of the episode, I mean, Yes is pretty clearly in the lead here, especially with Darrell, Janae, and Jemmy starting to have trouble with the latest checkpoint. And while that could have all been a red herring, the fact that we never got anything really negative about Yes throughout the episode did leave me feeling pretty good about him winning the season. Though Kellyanne did also play a pretty big role in this episode, with her having a pretty bad first 2 checkpoints, but she starts to catch back up by the end of it. Though I think if you look at it from a realistic standpoint, I mean, by that point she was being partnered with the other frontrunners, and with the format of this final, that meant that whenever she was getting a lot of points, that meant they were also getting a lot of points, which made it so that she would have a tough time recovering. Which is, again, why I do feel like there should have been one winner for each sex. The fact that the players can only be partnered with someone of the opposite sex made it so ideal for that to be the format, but they just didn't do it. And let's jump into the finale, where I might as well mention this now that I really do hate that we got a 2-part finale here, as I do feel like we lost a lot of the momentum that we had coming in from the last episode, where for the first third of this episode, I really just didn't really care about what was going on, and it did take me a while to get back into it, especially considering how much time they wasted at the beginning of the episode to reestablish the rules and people's motivations that, again, were already established in the last episode. Now we do get to the final partner change, where we get the gross food eating comp, and while there was some intrigue from Jemmy thinking about quitting and her just hating being partnered with Big Easy, after we get your typical sleeping section of the final, where we do get some last minute content for Janae, with her at this point having a pretty serious shot to win, and we see her relationship with Alton, and that's cool, but again, it doesn't really amount to much, especially when we get to the final checkpoint, an individual hike up a mountain, which again, I praised this finals format before this. I think the initial partner change, all that stuff is great. This, though, was pretty bad. I think this individual hike, one, is very physical and very much catered towards the men, where we do see that all of the men except for Big Easy finish first in this hike, but also took a lot of suspense out of this final. I mean, at this point, I was pretty sure Yes was winning based on the edit, but still, this completely took away any shot Janae or Kellyanne had at winning the game, despite them being relatively high in the points at this point. I did also find it strange that we get introduced to this checkpoint with TJ riding in on a horse, wearing some traditional clothing. That was just really bizarre, but we get the reveal that this checkpoint is going to be worth double the points, and again, even more leaning it towards a male winner here, which, again, they were doing such a good job before this of making it pretty even between men and women. And even then, I think with that format, it would have been better to have a male and female winner. But with this in there as well, it's it makes it even more apparent that should have been the case. But again, I mean, it is clearly between Darrell and Yes, with Yes having a major advantage in my eyes from the edit. During the hike itself, we do see Easy and Anissa working together, and I did like that moment for them. And they're both clearly in last and didn't really have a chance at winning, so to see them support each other on the way up was nice to see. But back to Yes, I mean, we do see him pass Darrell kind of out of nowhere, and at that point, I mean, this essentially becomes a coronation for him with no realistic outcome outside of his win here. And Yes winning, for me, it's a solid ending to the season. I mean, I think he's a satisfying winner. I mean, he probably could have gotten more airtime along the way, but to be honest, I don't think I would have been upset at really any of these people winning the season. I mean, yes, some people got under-edited in comparison to others, but I do feel like out of the 10 people left in the final here, I probably would have been underwhelmed with only maybe 1 or 2 of these people winning the season. I feel like everyone else had a pretty solid case for a win here based on the edit of the show. I did also find it funny at the end of the show here, where they really start to focus around talking about how tough this was, and it's possibly harder than the original show, which is I mean, come on. I mean, that's clearly not true, especially considering the shorter length of the season, over half the cast making the final. I will say that the challenges themselves probably weren't as toned down as I was expecting, but still, just the shorter format in general makes this a much easier show to win. But again, despite that, I still found the season to be pretty fun, and I do think this series has a lot of potential moving forward that I'm really excited to see it potentially live up to. But before ending the video here, let's talk about the rest of the cast, starting in reverse order of their placement. So in last place, we did have Big Easy, who I know gets a lot of flack considering how he never has any real potential of winning a season, and he kind of has the same storyline every season about being underestimated for Gauntlet 3 appearance and his big size and all that stuff. But it's
I actually enjoyed that arc on this season. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we haven't seen him in a while. Again, if this was like his 5th season in a row and he's having the same storyline like it was back in the day, like during Battle of the Seasons 2 or during Cutthroat or any of those, then yeah, I mean, I think that arc would get repetitive. But here, with us not seeing him for a long time, and to see him probably have his best season ever performance-wise, I mean, he actually does pretty well. I mean, like, yeah, he had no shot winning this final, but he does win that elimination against Nehemiah, which I think was a pretty impressive win. He always seemed to be one of the top competitors in puzzles, with the exception of like maybe 1 or 2 cases. And he finished the final here. Again, I think he had a nice arc here. Do I need to see him again? Probably not, but I did like his role on this season. And with that leads us to Anissa. It's pretty much that version of Big Easy that I was talking about, where it's like, again, like, she's had the same arc over and over and over again now on multiple seasons, all very close to each other. I mean, like, her Double Agents arc and her All-Stars arc are very similar, of her being underestimated and people don't respect her, except for, I do feel like that they did respect her a decent amount on this season. I mean, she does at least get to the final here, but again, it was much easier to get to this final. I think for me, the reason why Anissa's arc didn't work here is, again, we've seen it a lot more recently, but also I feel like there's a lack of self-awareness from Anissa that we don't get from Easy. Again, Easy is someone that like seemed to know that he had no shot of winning and was kind of okay with that. Anissa, though, seems to think that she can win, which I think this season makes it even clearer that she has no shot of winning any challenge season, ever. I mean, the fact that she comes in second to last out of 10 people in a less competitive field in a final, like, that's pretty bad in terms of winning chances. But again, I think you have to give Anissa some credit for making it to a final again. But again, she's not one of these people, like, do we need to see her again? For me personally, no, but we probably will, so, oh well. Next up, we have Ruthie, who was there. I feel like out of the people that made the final, she was probably one of the least prominent in the show. I mean, yeah, we did see some content of her relationship with Tech and her rivalry with Anissa, but really, Ruthie never seemed to have much going on this season. And for me, having a Ruthie win would have been pretty underwhelming, considering I don't feel like there was really any arc for her coming into this final. We then have Jemmy, who I've always liked. I mean, I think she's a great character who knows how to give really great confessionals. I feel like she stood out more as a competitor on this season as well. Where, I mean, yeah, she's had pretty deep runs in past seasons of the challenge, but I never looked at her as that good of a competitor. And to be fair, she was probably around the same on this season. Just again, the format benefited her a bit more, but she seemed to perform pretty well here. I mean, I think she's tied most confessionals for a season, had consistent airtime the entire way through, but I don't think she has any really major standout moment here. I mean, maybe her breakdown in the final, but it's like outside of that, it's like it's kind of just there. But unlike someone like a Ruthie, she's just really good at giving confessional, and through that made her a better character on the show. Next up, we have Alton, who, I mean, again, like Ruthie, seemed to not have much going on here. I mean, we did see his showmance with Fascella and his relationship with Janae at the very end, but I don't think there's much here from him, which sucks because I really like Alton. I mean, he's probably one of my favorite players when watching those older school seasons of the show. Like, I loved watching him on the Gauntlet too, but his most recent appearances have been pretty underwhelming, looking at Battle of the Seasons 2 and now on All Stars. I just don't think he's aged as well as some of the other players we're about to be talking about. And I do think from a story arc standpoint, again, like I think an Alton win would have been very disappointing. I think one of the few disappointing outcomes for a season, considering, again, he had no arc here. And really, again, like the finale sets up his arc as him trying to give Janae the win instead of him actually trying to win. But now we have Mark Long, who obviously is the creator of this All-Stars idea, the OG idea, which made it pretty questionable for him being on the actual cast. I always found that kind of strange, that he's like listed as executive producer, yet he's also a contestant on the show. As a figure on the show, I mean, Mark Long did his thing here. I don't think he lost a step from his past seasons. He's still easily one of the best physical competitors on this cast, winning dailies and eliminations. Socially, still one of the most liked people out there. And politically, he's solid as well. I mean, Mark's appearance on the season really just reinforces the opinion I had on him coming into the season. Again, unlike someone like Alton, where I think those two are kind of on the similar tier as a competitor coming into this season. I feel like Alton overall underperformed, while Mark Long pretty much performed exactly as expected. Next up, we have Kellyanne, who coming into this final, I would have said her edit was similar to that of an Alton or a Ruthie, but she did get a underdog edit here in the final, with her starting off really rocky, but then winning 3 checkpoints in a row. Though, again, that final checkpoint was pretty much the nail in her coffin. I mean, at that point, she really had no shot, though, again, also, just through the way that the partners were set up, she was also not really in a beneficial position to end up winning even before that, but I do think she's clearly one of the stronger female competitors on this cast, if not the strongest. Though, again, as a character, I don't know how well she's aged. I mean, she's probably one of my favorite female competitors from her earlier seasons. I mean, from The Island, The Ruins, I really love Kellyanne on those seasons. And then she took a massive break and then returned for Battle of the Bloodlines, Rivals 3, where she didn't make nearly as much of an impact. Then I think here on All Stars, she's kind of on that tier as well. So I don't know if she's kind of lost a step in terms of her being that entertaining of a character on the show, but I still wouldn't be opposed to seeing Kellyanne back again at some point. Next up, we have Janae, who was another one that didn't get that much screen time throughout the season, but she did at least have an arc the entire way through of her wanting to prove herself now that she's a mother, and she does get to her first final here and does end up performing pretty well. Again, character-wise, she didn't bring that much entertainment to the show, and really, I feel like that's kind of the thing with Janae over the course of her run on the challenge as a whole, is I never found her that entertaining, but I always found her pretty likable, and I do feel like if we're looking at her evolution as a person from where she started off on the challenge in her first appearance and where she is now, I do think that is a really satisfying arc for her in the grand scheme of the series as well. I do think she really did prove herself on this season. She did have a pretty good run here. Next up, we had the runner-up in Darrell, who performed as expected here. I mean, if I were to have a winner pick coming into the season, I would say that Darrell would have been that winner pick. I mean, even on the main show, he's still a really solid competitor. And on this season, he performed solidly enough as well up until the final, where he does lose his first ever final here, but even then, it's just barely. And I don't think he really underperformed during it. I think it was more so that another person just outperformed him. Character-wise, he was pretty much the same as he typically is. I mean, I've talked in the past how, like, I never really got the appeal of Darrell. I do think as I've started to watch more and more seasons, seen Darrell a lot more, I do start to see Darrell as a lot more likable figure. But at the end of the day, though, again, he is more of the same. But I do think the current iteration of Darrell works a lot better for this All-Stars cast than it does on the current iteration of the main show. And really, I think from this point moving forward, I would really just like to see Darrell on these all-star versions of the show instead of the main show. Where on the main show, I do feel like he gets kind of overshadowed at points. And finally, we have the winner in Yes, who really came out of left field for me as a good competitor. Again, I've never seen a season of the challenge with him, but from what I understand, he was never like this top tier person. But he really just blows it out of the park here. I mean, he impressively beats Darrell in a final. He was rarely in danger the entire season, despite having very few connections coming into it. And even at the one point that he is in danger, he successfully campaigns to not get thrown in, despite everyone seemingly looking at him as a big threat at that point. So again, I think Yes is a solid winner from a technical standpoint, but as a character, he just seems like a normal guy, which, I mean, that's cool. Again, he seems like a type of guy that you would want to hang out with, but as a TV character on a TV show, he does come off as pretty bland. I mean, he did have that one moment where he was trash talking Darrell towards the end of the final, but outside that, he just comes off as this really nice guy. And again, with his edit in the last few episodes, I did really feel like they were setting him up for a win, despite him getting almost no content in the first 6 episodes of the show. But all in all, I did find his win to still be pretty satisfying, and I did find him to be an impressive winner for this season from a competitive standpoint. But that's pretty much the season. Again, I feel like the Challenge All-Stars was a show that showed so much potential in its concept, but ended up under-delivering for me due to its presentation and format, which are two things that I think are pretty easy fixes moving forward. I mean, knowing that there is a season 2 coming, I feel like these are things that could easily be modified moving forward, and in that case, we could be getting a really great product that fully lives up to its potential. And even in its current form, despite its issues, I still had a lot of fun watching this season. I love the nostalgic feel that this season had. I feel like for the most part, this cast really brought it. I mean, yeah, there were people like Katie or Beth who kind of underwhelmed me on the return here, despite me being very excited for them. But for the most part, again, I feel like everyone did their part on this season that made this season work, despite all of the issues I had with it. I mean, to be honest, I'm more excited for season 2 of All Stars than I am for the next season of the main show. I mean, I had more fun with this season than I did with most of the recent seasons of the mainline series, with maybe only 1 or 2 modern seasons standing out to me as exceptions there. So I do think that the Challenge All-Stars was a great season. It's just a season that could have been so much more. But really, those are my thoughts on the Challenge All-Stars. In terms of Challenge, I do plan on watching and reviewing the next season of the mainline show and also All-Stars whenever we get it. Also, a bit sooner, we do have BBAU starting to wind down, and I'll do a review of that, along with the standard coverage of BB23 and Survivor 41 when those start airing as well. But for now, that's the video. Thank you for watching.